All right, so welcome everybody. This is the National Health Federation interviewing Bigtree. I'm Alex.landry, your host, and we have NHF national lobbyist Charles Froman as co-host. And today is Tuesday, December 7th. How are you doing? Thank you so much for your time today. This is literally a dream come true, I know, for both Charlie and I, and on behalf of the entire National Health Federation.
Well, I'm doing great today. It's a great way to start the day, getting to talk to you guys. I mean, obviously, National Health Federation's been here far longer in this fight than I have. So it's truly an honor to get to talk with you guys today.
Well, thank you, Dell. And for those who don't know, you were actually awarded the 2018 Health Freedom Hero Award. So that's a award the NHF has been given away now for a few decades. So you get to join the long list of incredible health freedom heroes who have really carried the torch for humanity, especially in some of these dark times right now. So not sure if you have that anywhere on your studio there, but it's definitely a nice award to show off.
I have that one. I have that one in my house, actually. I keep that one sort of close to me. It means a lot. I mean, as you said, for decades, the work that National Health Federation has been doing is critical. I don't think that I would have had the success that I've had in the work that I've done had that brilliant foundation not been poured and built to allow us the structure. And I think to have sort of, cultivated a population and a culture that was ready to truly understand the impact of this pandemic and all that is sort of involved with it. In so many ways, you guys have been predicting this type of, end game, and it was slow going. And the truth is I think it would have been slow going even for those of us that are newer at it, And I always say that, Robert Kennedy Jr. and I and Sherry Tenpenny and all these great voices for health freedom. I think we could have been shouting, for years and years, and we would not have seen the growth and the amount of people waking up that's been achieved by this complete international overreach, an attempt to destroy, the civil rights of people around the world, and obviously, even more importantly, those in the United States of America. Where we have such a powerful charter for freedom and liberty. So, it's only because I think that those seeds have been planted that we have these oak trees that we're able to stand on top of, and I think can truly stand in a position where we can win this.
That was so well said. I can't even believe it. So, wow. Well, here we are. I mean, I will say, who could have predicted this right now? Because you've been in this, longer than obviously, I have in the NHF. We're an umbrella organization, so we're kind of all over the place. Vaccine safety isn't necessarily our specialty, but I will say there's a certain activist who brought to my attention kind of all the momentum that was happening back in 2019. And then he has a petition with a link to the Highwire. And there hasn't been a lot of people I've been able to talk about this with, like what happened in Washington, Oregon, and Minnesota with their state resolutions being introduced in both chambers of their legislators, calling on the federal government and the Congress to strike this one paragraph of law. I believe it's like 42, U.S. Code 42, that has to do with the Liability Shield. And so kind of like being aware of that, it's like, well, how do we really win this war? Because that's what we're in. We're in a war of disinformation, misinformation, the whole vaccinated, unvaccinated. So I'd really like to hear your perspective on removing the Liability Shield. And obviously, I know Aaron Siri has said a little bit about that, but
Well, I mean, I think as we sit around and, obviously as I travel the nation, there's so many great organizations that are, standing for medical freedom in every single state in America. And, as you pointed out, for those that maybe this is new to, vaccines are really one of the only products in this nation, I think, really aside from maybe you could sort of lump in guns and nuclear power as the two other things that have some liability protections. I don't think those are good comparisons, but, you can't sue a gun manufacturer for somebody being shot by a gun. And I think the Nuclear Power Agency, should there be a nuclear meltdown, the government sort of steps in and has some protections to protect those agencies from being sued by people. And similarly, and I think more catastrophically, the vaccines in America are shielded from all liability by the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and also now by the PrEP Act, which was passed, just prior to this pandemic is being used. And so when we look at these things, it really is, it's really scary when you think of the pharmaceutical industry that pays out billions of dollars in lawsuits, almost every year. When we look at GlaxoSmithKline and Sanofi Aventis and Merck, cases against Johnson & Johnson just, over the last, just about a year ago, when it was proved that Johnson & Johnson's talcum powder had asbestos in it, and they always knew it had asbestos, and we were sprinkling this on our babies after they got out of bathroom, the shower, and women were using the shower to shower each day product after they were taking showers, and now we realized what types of cancer it was causing. We have fen, just all of these Vioxx that killed, arguably some people say 250,000 people. The numbers vary, but they paid out billions for having lied about safety. They cheat their safety studies. They hide information they have from us, and then they hide it. Meaning they really hide it from the FDA, the CDC. They push these products through saying they're safe, and it's only years later, after people die, that we, end up having some sort of class action lawsuit. And in those lawsuits, we get to have discovery where we actually get to see what they knew and what they didn't know. We don't have that process available to us when it comes to vaccines, not for any of the vaccines that have ever been given to our children. So we're being forced into a kangaroo court. A lot of people just call it vaccine court. There is no judge, there is no jury, and most of the time the press isn't allowed. And when somebody wins, they don't have discovery. You're not allowed to, ask for those internal emails where we might discover what they actually know about the product in early phase trials. You don't have precedent. You're not even allowed to reference other cases that have won just like yours. You have to start brand new as though the case is the first one of all times. And then when you finally get through that gauntlet, and think about this, even worse than that, you're not suing a manufacturer, you're suing the government of the United States of America. So when you're injured by a vaccine, you have to sue the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And the Secretary of Health and Human Services then reaches out to the Department of Justice lawyers that then fight you. They fight you and say, you've got to prove that this injury can be caused by a vaccine. And the only evidence they will look at are studies and trials that show that the vaccine has contributed or been proven to cause this issue. Well, who was supposed to have done that science? The only science that they accept is that is funded and produced by Health and Human Services, literally the group that you're suing. So in this, ridiculous situation, it's like being in a murder trial where the murderer is the one doing all the forensics. And so it's almost impossible to win. It's set up a scenario where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. There's no science available. Why the heck is Health and Human Services going to do the science if it's going to make them vulnerable to lawsuit? And so we've created this very, very, dangerous scenario that very few people make it through. And then those that somehow manage to win, most of the times, in order to be paid out or to get that win, it's pulled out of court. They always settle. They never allow them to actually get a final verdict. They settle and then silence them and tell them they can't talk to the press. And so this is the world we live in. And now, even more scary when we look at this COVID vaccine, you're seeing a product that jumped right out of its phase 3 trials, called it an emergency use authorization. We had a group, and so one of the things that our nonprofit has done, because Aaron Siri, who's this incredible lawyer that I teamed up with and has done all of our legal work, because of this indemnity, he said, well, let's sue the government of the United States and try to get to the bottom of the things that are being hidden, since they're now the ones that are taking on responsibility. So we've won lawsuits against the National Institute of Health, Health and Human Services, the FDA, and the CDC, and we're using sort of that quiver of arrows that we've pulled out of our own government now to move into bigger cases. And a lot of that information is now being used in civil cases and by many of these attorney generals that are pushing back against the COVID vaccine mandates. A lot of what we've proven that was being hidden by the government is now accessible and being used by many lawyers across this country. So that's just a taste of what we're involved in here. But to just say very clearly, when we try to think of, what would really, put us back on track for a healthier society where the safety trials and safety studies we expect to be done on any product we take, the pharmaceutical industry and specifically vaccines are getting away literally with murder. They don't have to do safety trials because they can't be sued if the product kills and injures people. And then you have, this court where the government protects them, uses Department of Justice lawyers against you. And think about this. In most circumstances, the Department of Justice lawyers are there to protect citizens. They fight on the behalf of the citizens of America against industries that may be injuring or poisoning rivers or doing things to harm citizens. This is one of the few circumstances where it's literally turned on its head. Now the Department of Justice lawyers are against the citizens protecting the pharmaceutical industry. If we could change that, if we could put liability back on the manufacturers, then I believe you would see these issues disappear overnight. There is absolutely no way, and they've said it. Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson have all said that they would never release this vaccine to any nation that didn't give them full indemnity from lawsuits, so full liability protections. So they're telling you, and even there was a great article, and AstraZeneca admitted and said, no, we have to be protected from liability because we can't be held accountable for a side effect that only appears 3 or 4 years down the road after getting this vaccine, essentially saying, you're the ones that made us rush this process, so we can't be held liable. I mean, this has got to change. If we could change this, I think that I could walk away. I think I could retire. I mean, I destroyed my television career as an Emmy-winning producer on the medical talk show The Doctors in order to get to the bottom of this issue. Now I have my show, The Highwire, at thehighwire.com. But I want to move on to other conversations. I would love to cover other issues and say that we did what was necessary. I think that moment for me would be the moment where we repeal the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Program and essentially any other protections like the PrEP Act, if they still exist. If we could just get vaccines back into the natural market forces that exist in a capitalist society like the United States of America, this ship would be righted naturally. The pharmaceutical industry would no longer put out vaccines that are, showing the highest death rates like this one we've ever seen, nearing 20,000 reported deaths in the VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. That's our capture system. That's often said to be capturing, somewhere around 1% of the actual amount of injuries. We wouldn't see that. They wouldn't put this product out. They would have done the proper long-term studies because they would have been liable. If we can do that and we can get this into a natural place, then I've never been here to try and eradicate vaccines from the planet. I'm called an anti-vaxxer. To me, that would mean I'm going to make sure that no one can ever touch vaccines. That's not my decision to make. I believe in health freedom. If you believe in these products, if you want to inject yourself with bacterias and viruses, I mean, it sounds like a voodoo witch doctor culture to me. But if that's what you want to do, that's up to you. It's a free country.
Well, a few points, Dal. I got to say, like with informed consent, I really like how you bring up the process of discovery, because technically none of us have informed consent because the vaccine makers haven't been sued in civil court and there hasn't been the official discovery process. So that's why even for those claiming informed consent, there is no informed consent because there's never been discovery and the internal documents revealed, like you mentioned. And I will say you have a gift, because I think part of us getting out of this mess is explaining what you just explained in layman terms, really, about the vaccine court. And you're obviously smarter than I am at this, but from my understanding, repealing the 86 Act would get rid of VAERS, and it would get rid of this court, which at least has, paid out, albeit taxpayers' money, over $5 billion. But at least we can say that we have a database and we have a court, which repealing would get rid of that. And that's why just removing that one paragraph of law, which is the restoring the civil suit liability. So that's what I was referring to. I shared it with Jimmy. It was like a 5-minute clip from 2018 where you were talking about what Washington had done, how other states had followed suit, how there was 50 sponsors throughout, their senators and reps, and how really we just needed other states to do that, to create this groundswell, throughout our movement, because as we know, everything's divide and conquer. I mean, I don't want to go on a tangent, but even in my congressional district, it's like we had a clear front runner, to unseat Charlie Crist, who's just been there for a while, and now we're having infighting, and it's just ridiculous, this constant, divide and conquer. So yeah, I just wanted to credit you with that, because when we're able to take these complex issues and articulate it in layman terms, we're doing a lot of good, for others. Because I think so many things, especially the economy, it's just, unless you're an economist, you can't understand it. So like, unless you're a scientist or a vaccinologist, just listen to the experts. But then someone like you who has a gift where you can, articulate it depending on who you're communicating with. So thank you for that.
Thank you. You bet. And I mean, I think that that's one of the things that's made the Highwire a success, is that, and frankly, I think in some ways, I know you said I'm smarter than you. I think that sort of my talent is not, I'm not sure that how smart I am. In fact, I think it's sort of the simplicity with which I look at things, that once I can finally understand it, I'm really able to, I think like everybody else out there. So I present the information in a way that I would understand it. So I have a team of international scientists and lawyers and doctors that sit with me every week. And frankly, if you watched it, I'm getting drilled, like trying to help me understand the science. And, we just did a very important interview with a world-renowned vaccine maker, Geert van den Bosch, who I think is predicting where this pandemic is going better than anyone else in the world. He has very, very dire concerns. But I spent multiple Zoom calls with him in Belgium, hours and hours, and then sat with my team of specialists trying to really help me understand exactly what was being said. I mean, we're really deep down there in the weeds now. But that's when we finally present the information on the Highwire, my goal is now that I understand it, to really try and help people understand this, because it's unfortunate. And I think we've all decided that, when it comes to medicine, I'm going to trust my doctor. I just got to trust my doctor. And I get it. Like, we're all exhausted. We're all working 2 and 3 jobs. We're just trying to survive. And we're doing our best to read all the ingredients on the, the food containers at the grocery store. And if we have kids, we're looking up the crash test on the car seat. And am I going to use glass, or is there truly, plastics without BPA, or am I going to go with stainless steel? And is there really toxic metal exposure? Like, all of this is just consuming our time. So when it comes to like this vaccination and drug decisions, we want to just put that in the one sector. I just don't have to apply my own mind, time, and energy to it. I've got to trust the experts. And I think that if anything's happened this pandemic, is becoming clear to the millions, hundreds of millions of people that are waking up in this country, and billions around the world, that unfortunately we're going to have to do our homework here too. And so at the Highwire, I'm really trying to make that homework as enjoyable and entertaining as I can, because it's going to decide the fate of our species as it is right now. There are way too many people being murdered by this pandemic, the approaches towards the pandemic, and specifically this vaccine. I think we are just beginning what will probably go down in history as one of the greatest human die-offs of all times, since the dawn of man. And it's going to be attributed to scientific error that was foisted upon us by bias-driven, scientism, leaders, not scientists, but people that are approaching scientists with more of a religious focus, which is trust us or else, have faith in us or else. There is no scientific dialogue. There are, I would say at least half the scientists of the world are disagreeing with the approaches that are being used, are disagreeing with the safety of these vaccines. There is no consensus, even though I've never thought that consensus matters in science. It's never consensus that has evolved, or any scientific principle or project or product. It's always the individual, the one doctor, the singular team that decides to step outside of the norm, out of the consensus, and say, you know what, we're taking a different look at this. That's how science always advances. But in this case, they don't even have the consensus. I would almost say now that Tony Fauci and Deborah Birx and these people that have sort of foisted this upon us, they are the minority in the world. It's just that the rest of the scientists are all trying to protect their jobs at universities that will fire them. Funding will disappear from the pharmaceutical industry if they don't toe the line. But more and more of them are speaking out. And we're now in a situation where, at least at the Highwire, all I've done is present pro-pharma, pro-vaccine scientists for the last year that are jumping ship on this vaccine and calling it dangerous and deadly. And that's even including the inventor of mRNA vaccines himself, Dr. Robert Malone. So we are in an incredibly unique moment in time, one that I think, again, I would say only because of the work that NHF has done, have you laid this groundwork to have sort of, in many ways, you said, who would predict this? You guys did. I mean, in many ways, you guys are predicting this type of end if we allow pharma the protections and freedom from liability and freedom from responsibility that they've had over the years, and the ability for them to crush other, approaches towards health, where it's chiropractic or, herbs or homeopathy. All of those things you guys have been fighting for is sort of this world where pharma, and if you go back to the history of the Rockefellers, really taking over science and deciding to make petrochemicals the way that we heal ourselves. That's a fight that you guys have been at for a very, very long time. And now we're at the pinnacle of, are we going to lose or win that battle? I think lucky for us, in many ways, so many people were asleep at the wheel. Too many people were asleep at the wheel. And as we all sort of said over the years, it's like we're all being boiled in this pot of water like frogs. But if you slowly raise the temperature, no one jumps out of that pot. One of the things I think we've really achieved, both with the film, the film that I made, Vaxxed, a lot of the work of Robert Kennedy Jr. with Children's Health Defense, you guys, our nonprofit, Informed Consent Action Network, we actually went out to pick a fight. We got in their face. And I think Vaxxed changed this conversation so quickly around the world that we forced their hand. And I believe this pandemic, in many ways, it's a fake pandemic. I'm not saying that coronavirus doesn't exist. I'm saying that it has a very low death rate, and it's isolated to a very select group of people that were already very, very sick. It's been blown into something that it's really not. But because of that, I think they've done that to try and scare us all back into compliance. And it's had the opposite effect. It's been a disaster for the pharmaceutical industry and the governments of the world, but it's done what we needed to do. As I said, we could have been shouting for years and years. We would have never had the growth that we've seen. I just saw it reported in a Rasmussen poll that now 54% of Americans do not have faith in the vaccine program. That's up in just in the last 4 years that I've been at this, or 5 since Vaxxed. I think we were somewhere in the 5 to 10% were really questioning vaccines. We're now the majority in the United States of America. I think that shows such an amazing success. But honestly, I can't take the credit. I got to say, Joe Biden and even Donald Trump warp speeding this vaccine, bringing about draconian measures. They're responsible for growing this movement. And I think it's the only reason we're actually going to win this. But to sort of finish this point, we forced their hand. I think we made them jump and try and, force us into compliance. These draconian measures are their response to our incredible growth over the last few years. So essentially, we made them just turn that dial up faster than they wanted to. If they'd have just stayed on that slow course, they might have gotten there. We made them rush this, and now people are waking up. So in some ways, we're playing a game of chicken, but it was the only way we had a chance of winning this. And I really feel like if we can't win this now, even though perhaps some of it's our fault because we pressured them to jump the gun, but this is what needed to happen. When you're up against Goliath, you need to piss Goliath off, and you need Goliath to swing and miss, and that's what happened. Now we got to give him one pow right in the kisser, as they used to say on the honeymooners.
Dale, hi, it's Charlie Froman here, and thank you for all that. You mentioned wanting to branch out into other issues, and certainly we can be a resource to you to whatever extent you think we might be valuable in that area. We are working with a coalition of activists in the safe wireless movement, safe tech movement as well. And we have a new project to promote a hearing on what is the actual safety of wireless as telecom deploys its antennas on every roof outside our bedrooms and kids' classrooms. We're also looking at the FDA and its threat to supplements, which are part of healthcare.
Mhm.
But we are very much engaged in the vaccine issue, like yourself, and we have our own Aaron Siri, Greg.glaser, who's now joined us, and he is known as the Human Vaccine Encyclopedia. And I'm sure he and Aaron are talking all the time behind the scenes. He works with Mary Holland, also at Children's Health Defense, and his work at Physicians for Informed Consent, which a lot of folks think puts out the best content on all the vaccines. We've gotten Congressman Gomer to introduce HR 5816 to establish a national informed consent exemption called the NICE. Not just for the COVID vaccine, but for all vaccines, because we think the structural defaults with the COVID vaccine affect other vaccines. And the bill also prohibits the federal government, and you should like this, from refusing ever again to study the unvaccinated so that we can have true comparison studies. And I'll let Greg discuss that a bit more. But you mentioned the Rasmussen report, a poll, which shows that we have the majorities with us on being skeptical of the claims of safety with the COVID vaccine. ABC reported half a decade ago that a third of parents aren't following strictly the childhood vaccination schedule.
Yeah.
To what extent do you think, given your reporting over the several past years, that this skepticism of COVID vaccination might spread to the whole vaccine schedule and the whole corrupt nature of CDC science behind the vaccination?
Not only do I think the studies and the articles and the research is showing us exactly that. We have the lowest rate of vaccine uptake in our children's vaccine program in history. Measles vaccines is behind by millions of children. And everywhere we look, and one of the things that people report to me all the time is their friend that never really listened to them before, were pro-vaxxers, vaccinating their children, but really are concerned about this COVID vaccine, don't want it for themselves, don't want it for their children, and now they're asking for information on the whole childhood vaccine. So many people reporting to me, yeah, my friend is now saying, I know I didn't want the COVID vaccine, but watching how they did this, watching how it's being forced on me, it's making me take another look at all of the vaccines in the childhood vaccine program. As I said, I mean, we know that's happening. There's complaints now around the world. UK is having the same issue, people that are running from the vaccine program. So I know there's a lot of people out there, even on our side, that get very skeptical and say, oh, they. I mean, I really want to try and change this languaging where they've outsmarted us. This is all a part of their plan. Like that idea, I assure you, their plan was not to move America from a 10 to 15% vaccine hesitancy rate to a 54% vaccine hesitancy rate. This has backfired on them in the greatest way, and thank God. And frankly, we've been sort of, to be honest with you, and I don't like to talk strategy publicly, mostly I'm transparent as it gets, but I think we're getting to the point we might as well say it, which is, I've been saying to people, let's not talk about the childhood vaccine program right now. I mean, Bobby Kennedy and I met, we were at the National Institute of Health across from Tony Fauci and Francis Collins back in 2017 in a meeting Donald Trump set up, and Reed Cordish, one of the representatives from the White House, was there as we laid out all of the problems and dangers and lack of proper safety studies of the childhood vaccine program. But now that COVID's here, I've been saying just give them all the rope they need to hang themselves. And I know there's been a desire to say, well, if you think the safety trials on COVID was bad, you should look at measles, you should look at the DTaP, or worst of all, the hepatitis B vaccine we're giving to day one old babies. And I've been saying basically, just hold on a second. Let's not distract the focus where this is going. Let's let all these people really wake up to how bad this is. I mean, look at what's just happened. I think we're now at, and Greg, you might correct me on this, but we're, I think, at 27 attorney generals. 27 states have filed lawsuits in one form or another against these vaccine mandates for COVID, saying, a person's body, their choice. right? And body autonomy being the conversation. That is such a huge advancement. And I plan, once they win those lawsuits and we get through this and prove that the federal government never had that power, the next job we'll all have to do is go to those attorney generals, go to the governors of those states and say, you know what? It's really awesome, your language around COVID-19, that you believe that we should have the choices for our own body. But wouldn't it be hypocritical to say that as parents, we don't have the choices over our children's bodies? I think they're laying the groundwork by which we're going to be able to remove the mandates for the childhood vaccine program too. And a lot of these being Republicans that are standing in liberty value systems, we're going to have to push the line forward from where they're standing now against COVID to that being parental rights for all. So I think they've opened a door that Froman never wanted to have open, and it's going to be, I think, very exciting in the years ahead after we get through what will be, I mean, trust me, we're not through this. I think in many ways we're in the eye of the storm right now. But when we get through this, I think there's a better day ahead, and really sort of that promised land that NHF, I think, is fighting for decades.
To that extent, in terms of strategy and disclosing what we're thinking, Greg can explain this, but I think we have a great argument, and that's the real epidemic, chronic disease. Mm-hmm. And Greg, do you want to kind of show that parallel between the explosion of the vaccine schedule from the Liability Shield, Alex, and the chronic disease epidemic, which folks are scared of once they learn about it?
Absolutely. This is a tremendous opportunity to be able to speak with Del Bigtree. They say that 90% of communication is nonverbal. When I missed the first 20 minutes of this meeting, I actually got up to 100%. So, I'm so persuaded that the control group is the core of what creates change. If mercury in vaccines was not enough to convince the authorities, what would be ever? And so always the other part of the calculus is how healthy are these unvaccinated people? And that's where, for example, Vax2 really shined to show the evidence. But what about the control group's data as well, like Paul Thomas's data, Brian Hooker's data, and the control group data as well, my litigation study? I think that for the public to really appreciate the harm that COVID vaccines are causing, they have to see that side of the equation, which is just how healthy are these unvaccinated people? And then what is an unvaccinated person? Is it someone who's never received a vaccine in their lifetime? And so I think that message, the time for that message has come. And so there's two different theories on how to present it. One is strike while the iron's hot, while people are focused on the issue. And the other is wait until they've had, the rope to hang themselves with. And, if they're false in one, they're false in all. I think both strategies are probably correct and will work concurrently. And I have so many questions for Del. I wrote down a bunch. So I don't know which one to focus on, but let me do this one first. Okay. Del, what is the difference between educating an audience and versus educating people one-on-one? If the average Joe gets to speak with you on the street, what's that like?
I think the main difference I would say is the approach is when you're educating an audience, you're laying out facts, right? And that audience is usually there. Remember, if you have an audience, they're there on purpose. They've chosen to come to you, which means they're already in the space. Even if it's brand new, a friend said, you should check this out. And so you're laying out a lot of evidence for your point. It's also different because they know that I don't see them and I'm not looking at them. So there's not an ego battle between me and the audience I'm speaking to, right? They're anonymously taking in information. And so to an audience, you're allowed to present a lot of, the science. And one of the things we do on the Highwire, we're a completely transparent news organization in that if you're signed up to my newsletter, we do a show every Thursday. On Monday, you receive hyperlinks to all of the evidence and all of the studies, all of the journals I've referenced, so you can read the whole study yourself. I'm trying to teach people how to be critical thinkers and also where they look for their information. I don't want me to be the information. I'm handing out the information. I want them to read it. Now, I approach the personal conversation very differently. And it's something that I've watched is that I think we tend to try and do what Del Bigtree does on the show. We have all this evidence, and then we go to our loved one, our friend, a relative, whatever it is, and then we just bury them in information as though somehow that will convince them that they need to come to our side, and it's not the right approach. In many ways, it just creates a wall. You're not listening, and I think what I want to say to people is in these situations, you want to be listened to by that person you're trying to help. I know you're trying to help them, but if you're not listening, you're not setting up an example for them to listen. And so I think the critical thing in a personal conversation is I actually approach that very differently. I ask questions. I ask more questions than I give facts. For instance, if I'm talking to a politician, I go into a congressman's room or a senator's room, I often start the conversation like this. I say, I'm curious. I want to ask you a question before we get started. Since we're talking about mandates in your state, would you ever mandate penicillin to be given to every single person in your state that gets an infection? And they'll always say no. And I say, oh, why? And they'll say, well, because some people are allergic to penicillin. I said, oh, right. Okay, great. So then we're on the same page there. So I'd like to point out that vaccines are no different than any drug. There is not a single pharmaceutical product that someone's not going to be allergic to and have an anaphylactic reaction or a heart problem. We know this to be a fact. In fact, I'll take it a step further. There's actually not a piece of food we could give everybody in your state and someone won't die from an allergic reaction. And so in order to start this conversation, I don't want the conversation to be if vaccines injure children, because I think I've proven very clearly we know that vaccines will injure some children. The question that perhaps we should be asking ourselves is how many children are being injured or killed, and what is the threshold that you're willing to accept as a part of that process? Yeah. And now they're listening, right? Now they're like, okay. And so with a friend, I'll say, do you just normally trust pharma implicitly? Like you think that they're just there to heal people? I've never started the conversation with that question and had a friend say, yeah, man, I love everything pharma makes. They all will say, well, no, of course not. I think they're a bunch of money grubbers. They do things for money. And okay, all right, so we're in agreement there. We're trying to find common ground. So let me ask you this. Are you under the impression that vaccines are made by some different group of people inside of pharma? Like, is there a room full of angels that make vaccines and only the bad people make drugs? And sort of using questions. I feel like my job in a one-on-one conversation is to plant a question so deep inside of them that they can't answer, that it leaves them awake that night, staring at their ceiling, wondering why they can't answer it. And then they begin their journey, hopefully, to start doing an investigation. And so lastly, and I know I'm long-winded on all these, but I want to make sure people truly understand. The job in the one-on-one conversation, you will never be told at the end of that conversation, you won me over, you win, I lose. That's what we look for. We want this victory. We want to know we've achieved. If you've done the job right, they'll leave. There'll be a little bit of tension around it. They may not even thank you, but they'll come back to you 6 months later and say, you know what, you changed my life. I started investigating. I didn't want to tell you. It's going to be a silent victory. That's what we need to be working towards.
It's planting seeds. That is so correct. And think of all the people who would love to have you and Aaron Siri at their family dinner table to convince their family. I'm telling you, that would just be,
yeah.
How can I sign up for that? It also emphasizes the point about planting seeds and the NICE Act, which we were just talking about. The idea is getting into Congress and educating them about the full vaccine schedule, planting those seeds, those 6 month, 9 month seeds, so that when the time does come, how close is that rope? When the time does come, they're primed and ready. My next question for you, Del, is about the tremendous credibility that ICANN has built. I've gotten to the point in my cases where I'm filing legal documents where I cite ICANN higher than the New York Times. The credibility is off the chart. It's so impressive. And so my question to you is, what is the tipping point with when it comes to the judiciary and recognizing the validity of both independent information and mainstream information? In other words, we're bringing to the judiciary, we're bringing to judges both mainstream information, CDC, New York Times. We're also bringing independent information like Del Bigtree and ICANN and Aaron Siri and Steve Kirsch. all of these great sources that are really getting more to the data. So my question is about the judiciary's addiction to mainstream media. It's almost like King James version only, mainstream media only. They're just going to see this one thing. What is the tipping point where we finally get to achieve parity between independent media and mainstream?
Well, first of all, though, I think that obviously mainstream media is probably the most difficult part of this whole conversation. Is frankly the only reason that they haven't admitted defeat already. I always say, if I had Chris Cuomo's spot on CNN for the next 7 days, I believe this would be over. I think we could end this pandemic. Right? It's that powerful. The fact that pharma has such a death grip on the megaphone of the world, which is the television set, is the only thing they have. They've lost every other argument. They cannot debate us. They're losing in courtrooms now as we speak, as we know, against the Biden administration. This thing should be over, but it's not, because they still hold that brainwashing square that's sitting on the wall in everybody's house. But I don't necessarily believe that that's what is affecting these decisions in courtrooms. I think the problem, and I think you know this, Greg, that the real problem we have in a courtroom is that a judge does not consider themselves a science expert, and they really don't feel comfortable arguing or making decisions on science. Their position, for the most part, is whatever the CDC says, I'm going to stick with that. That is the governing body of science in this country. Maybe they reference FDA or Health and Human Services. They're all the same. It's these regulatory agencies. And so who are we as lawyers or as nonprofits to represent a different perspective on science? I work for the United States government. I am a judge in the system of the United States government. We have apparently the best scientists in the world that go through all this information. So whatever the CDC dictates, that's what this courtroom is going to stand with. And that's where we're in a very, very difficult situation. And frankly, it's the same difficulty we have with our intelligent friends. We've got to convince them that the world's leading scientists like Tony Fauci are really lying, and that the FDA and the CDC have never or currently do not care about the health of the citizens of the United States of America, but rather are helping the pharmaceutical industry put out, dangerous products for a profit in the billions of dollars. It's a very, very hard sell, and it's why we've got to be, empathetic towards the people we're talking to, because frankly, until we've gone through whatever experience we have that has woken us up to this, perhaps an injury in our children, or an injury close enough where we really listened to somebody that affected us, until you've gone through that, this sounds like crazy talk. And to many judges, it's crazy. Who am I? I mean, no matter what information you present to them, what they're recognizing is there's obviously two different sides to this story. And this science, but which one are we going to listen to? The one that's coming from a group of lawyers and maybe some doctors, or the one that comes from the most prestigious health departments in the world? That's what we're having to deal with. It's why I think, frankly, I'm going to give it a pitch, because I just finished Robert Kennedy Jr.'s book, on Fauci. And frankly, I'm going to say this, history books will tell of two groups of people in this world: those who read his book on Fauci and those who did not. And I have news for you: the history books will be written by those who read his book, because they're going to be the only ones that survived this. I mean, truly, he truly is laying out the problem we have in our regulatory agencies. And it's one of the biggest issues I have when I'm being attacked by New York Times, Washington Post. They want me to say that I think doctors are evil and that they're all a part of a giant conspiracy. It's not true. My problem is not Pfizer. My problem is not Moderna. They're a bunch of money-grubbing industry professionals like every other industry there is. Everyone's out to make money. They report to, their stockholders, and they have to make money, and they're going to cut every corner they can to make that money. That's how every industry in the world works. My problem is the regulatory agencies that are not breaking that down, are not demanding better science, are not standing in the way and saying, you know what, you're not going to slide that past us. But on the other, in fact, they're doing the opposite. They're helping fast track these products that haven't been properly safety tested. My issue is with the regulatory agencies, and until we clean up that mess, it's going to continue to be a very difficult situation in courtrooms.
Yeah. Oh boy, that I can really appreciate that. How much of this is, am I characterizing it correctly, that it's an addiction, that the public has an addiction to mainstream sources? The CDC says, well, the FDA says it is. Is addiction a proper term, do you think?
I mean, I think addiction or perhaps just laziness. It's the same reason, instead of, when you just simply look at someone that gets heartburn every time they eat a Philly cheesesteak, it would seem smart to just stop eating Philly cheesesteaks, but we'll just take a pill instead of changing our diet, right? We want that quick fix. We're a symptom-driven society. And so very similarly, we want to just be able to believe what we hear on the news. And so it's just easier that way. I pick who I trust, whatever they say goes, and I'm going to live in that world. And frankly, I think there's a lot of people that may even be on the fence with the COVID vaccine. It does look like it was kind of rushed out, but I don't think they want to live in a world where they have to do their own thinking. And so they really line up for that vaccine in some ways. And this is just a guess, but I think there's a sense that if I die following the people that I trusted, then fine. I don't want to live in a world where I can't trust the authorities and they aren't taking care of me, because that would just be too much work and it would be a miserable world.
Wow. That's so interesting.
May I add real quick? I think, and Del, you would know probably best, some of the addiction is around what's called yellow journalism or sensationalism. So like people have become disenfranchised with what investigative journalists do and why they do what they do. So just my 2 cents there.
No, you're absolutely right. And that, like, I worked for television. Fear sells, you know what I mean? Drama sells, and so we really, but I mean, honestly, I feel like we've been tapped out. I think we're becoming emotionally exhausted with the news to the point where it just, when everything, it's sort of like, I think of Spinal Tap, the guitar that goes up to 11. When you just stay at 11 the whole time, eventually you just lose any quality of, what goes higher or lower, and we just sort of tap out. I think that's where we're at. I think we're emotionally exhausted, and I think we've sort of lost the power. The news has lost the power to truly own us because there's just nothing left to grab a hold of. And I think it's why people are waking up. And I think it's why they're starting to listen to more reasonable perspectives. On the Highwire, we try not to be sensational, but to just lay things out with reason. And so we're growing exponentially. Our show is, even though we have no Facebook page anymore, no YouTube page, people are really sharing with their friends, and we're growing every single week. And the thing that I hear as I'm stopped in airports and restaurants all around the country now is, you just made sense. When I started listening to it, it made sense. And you didn't treat me like I was stupid. It wasn't just a singular headline and moving on. And believe us, you provide the data, you explain how it works. You're treating me like I'm an intelligent human being.
Yeah.
And I think it's why we're going to be successful.
Absolutely. You did an interview with Zach Bush, MD, that went just nationwide. It was picking up millions of views before it got cut off by, I think, YouTube took it down. And it shows how much the Highwire is helping to heal people. It was this, I don't know, did Charlie, Alex, did you guys see this interview? It was epic. And which is what everybody was saying. It was like, this was a heart-to-heart conversation about healing, fundamental healing for our society. It was beautiful. Which leads me to my next question. This is about the bigger picture and absolute power. So Del, you've talked in the past about a science-based exemption to vaccination, which you think should exist in American law. Very persuasive. You talked about it at our doctors meeting, and the doctors were just going, yes, absolutely. We need this. We need what Del's talking about. So my question to you is about the times that we're living in. Are we living in a time period where exemptions are necessary, and we're growing toward a more enlightened society where we don't even need to compel the population with worldwide vaccination? And part of that question, so it's about exemptions versus vaccines cannot be compelled. And then part of that is, what's the role of judges, do you think? Because traditionally we've always said, well, a judge can force you to do anything, right? I mean, that's kind of the nature of the judges. But what about Del's view of a utopia, of a society that we can grow toward?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things you're pointing to is, a lot of times we can be accused of only getting halfway there, right? Not fighting the big fight, which would be to just end mandates altogether. Why fight for an exemption? An exemption is only empowering the people to say that there's something that's viable in a vaccine program. And, I think that, one of the approaches that's made our legal team very successful is we haven't gone for the big, gigantic, I have the religious right to choose what goes into my body, or, religious exemption is held up by the Constitution. Aaron Siri and the lawsuits we've gone after have never made those giant, broad statements that sound really sexy, and you can raise a lot of money and you can go plowing through the front door only to be kicked right back out and tumbling down the stairs. We have had little wins. We look at little weaknesses in a law, and it's slower going. And one of the things that's been great with our audience is they've watched how it's been this slow trickle that's really starting to get momentum at little problems that we're winning in courtrooms, the little things we're winning against the National Institute of Health and Health and Human Services. And so I am very much about win wherever and however we can win, that every win moves us in the right direction. We are turning a giant, freighter right now, and that's going to be slow. I get it. People want to just whip that sucker around and say, see, they were wrong. It's heading the other direction. I just don't see that that's the way that things goes. And there are arguments we'd love to make, but we're not ready to make them. They're too broad or too big a move. And so I think anywhere right now, if it's exemptions, you're working on a particular exemption that kind of sounds to me a little bit like the science exemption. I kind of like the sound of it. And to people that, haven't heard me say that, I'm tired of it being about, my personal belief or my religious belief is why I don't vaccinate, as though I have a religious belief that goes against your science. And that's, and to me, the point I make is that, look, if your science requires that I accept the fact that the product never had to go through a proper safety study, that the scientists just nailed it, and they know they nailed it, and it doesn't matter that they're going to make billions of dollars off of it, I have to have faith that they would never put it out, the product, without a safety trial, just for the money, that they only care about the people. And I have to have faith that Tony Fauci, who time and time again appears to have pushed through products because he's working for the pharmaceutical industry, that he really did do the proper safety studies. I have to have faith right now with COVID that when the FDA was telling us that they were going to fast track this product to the people, before they'd ever even seen the science or the evidence behind it, that didn't result in a product being moved too quickly. I have to have faith that my doctor that's telling me to use it really did their due diligence and looked at the data that was in those trials beyond what they were told. And I would say, with the amount of faith that I just laid out there to put this into my child, that sounds a lot more like a religion than it does like science. And so I think, either when there's a religious exemption, I'm not fighting my religion against yours. I'm fighting my religion against your religion, not against science. And we have a freedom of religion. But what I want is a scientific exemption. The only reason I don't vaccinate my children is not because of some personal belief I have, and not because of the church that I go to. I don't vaccinate my kids because of the science. I would never put a product in my children that has never been through a proper long-term safety trial against a placebo group. And I'm talking about, we are talking about a product that alters the immune system of your child for life. It's never the same again. We are going to change their God-given body with this product. I'm sorry. 4 or 5 days of the safety trial, like the hepatitis B vaccine, literally that's how long it is. Someone can look it up. We are suing right now the FDA to demand the removal of the hepatitis B vaccine, because 4 and 5 days is not a long enough safety trial for any product. I wouldn't even try a bottle of water that only was looked at for 4 or 5 days. So under those circumstances, I scientifically exempt out of vaccination. So that's where I'm at with that.
Greg, you mentioned that great interview with Zach Bush, and thank you, Del, for your explanation of that science exemption, which is probably how most folks think when they're getting exemptions, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Another great interview you had was with James Corbett, which gets to your point about being in the eye of the storm. Yeah. And it probably will get rougher. People still are losing their jobs based on employer mandates, despite OSHA's not enforcing it and the court victories we've had. how bad is the storm going to get before we make some progress? You mentioned Rasmussen's poll, which is good news. The people are with us, and good news in the court cases, but people are still desperate out there, and we see what's going on with these European countries and Australia. So how bad is the storm going to get?
I think it's going to get as ugly as any moment we've ever seen in human history, and nothing short of it. You have to recognize, when you try to figure out what's going on here, one of the things that we do is we stare our opponent in the eye every day. Most people aren't doing this, but we have been studying this, and you've got to recognize, what is my opponent doing? What are they, how dedicated to their cause are they? When you watch Tony Fauci multiple times where Rand Paul gave him an opportunity under oath to step away from his statement that he had not funded gain of function research, saying, I'm going to give you another opportunity to correct that statement. I'm reading you the study where it clearly sounds like this is gain of function. Do you want to change your statement now in front of the public? And Tony Fauci said, absolutely not. What you're seeing is a world order, a health, being driven by a health body. These people are all in. This is a fight absolutely to the death, because they know if we win, Tony Fauci is going to prison the rest of his life, which probably is less painful to him than the idea that he's going to go down in history as one of the greatest catastrophic human beings to ever touch science on this planet. And so they are into the end. This isn't going to go away because we've showed how many people you killed with the vaccine. This is going to go to martial law. I believe that the next steps you will see is this is all theory right now. I like to stand in facts. We're all trying to predict where this is going, but I think you're going to see something very similar to what set up the original Civil War. Even though we know that slave trading had something to do with it, it really came down to finances. Who was making more money? And I think as you see Texas and Florida, and these states that are not having mask mandates are blocking the vaccines. They are having conventions, and so all the businesses are moving up. Texas right now, if you turn off the lights at night and look, there is a traffic jam from California and New York pouring into Texas right now. The Texas and Florida, these states that are believing in liberty and freedom, are going to become so incredibly affluent as we watch 25% of New York City leaving, as we watch LA crumbling under its own weight. I believe, depending on the president, if they sort of side with those states, you're going to see travel bans, I believe, from those red states and the blue states. Even though I consider myself politically marooned, obviously there's issues around liberty that make a lot of sense to me right now. But I think that divide, just financially based, is going to get to be more and more of a problem as the states that are siding with the government are locking people down, are destroying businesses, are looking across the fence, as it were, into the grass on the other side, and it is going to be a lot greener, and there's going to be a rage that's going to start to grow around that. And it's also being fueled by the media that has got us divided, got us screaming at each other. We're already seeing riots in different, conversations around this nation. I think that that's one of the things. And when I've talked to insiders that work for the government, work in military, they're all being trained for more and more of sort of these pop-up riots for multiple different reasons that are being fueled by the way our media is making us feel alone, is really raping our minds and separating us from our ability to talk to one another. That's why I think the most important thing we do is we've got to learn to get away from this idea of being PC. We've got to sit at our Thanksgiving tables, our Christmas tables, and start getting back to those more uncomfortable conversations. And again, use questions. Don't use statements to each other.
Right.
Just what is it about? How do you feel about the price of gas right now? How do you feel about walking into a grocery store? We've all got to be having the same feeling. When I see empty shelves, I feel like I read about this happening in the Soviet Union. I never thought it would have happened in America. And how are we going to work together to change that? Let's take the players out of it. I think the government is corrupt. We, the people, are what's going to change this. But we've got to learn to start enrolling each other again and getting back to the people. These figureheads are all lying to us. But we, the people, have the power. And we've got to take that back. And that's going to mean those uncomfortable conversations, handle it as, in as blessed a way as you can. That's how we shift this.
That's amazing. You know, I started off with 90% of communication is nonverbal. Del, how do you do it? You know, it's so cool. I've seen you speak to an entire room filled with physicians, and everyone is just hanging on every word. You're so good at this, and you have a persuasiveness. You're very important in history. I think you're wise, and you know things about not just freedom, but about harmony. And so I'm going to give our NHF viewers a job to do, some homework. Google Del Bigtree, Zach Bush, MD. People have said this interview changed their life, that it was insightful. It shows that freedom by itself is not necessarily what we're going for. We're also going for harmony. The idea of a more enlightened society, a society that learned lessons from the past. And Del has shared here on this interview a lot of very important lessons about where we are and where we're going and what success looks like. And you have the credibility to say what success looks like because that's what you're doing every month. I feel like there's a new ICANN newsletter saying, oh, here's another lawsuit we won. So keep up the good work and thank you.
Well, you know, it's interesting that Zach Bush, it was funny. I was talking to a friend once who was talking about how he goes to India to see his guru. And I've always thought, you know, that's weird. I'm really about like, you know, your truth is inside of you. I'm not one that really seeks out someone outside of me to sort of bestow some great truth upon me. But I mean, I respect people that do. And it was like a week later, I was doing that Zach Bush interview. And I was thinking, you know what? Zach is that sort of guru to me. I mean, every time I've interviewed him twice, it is the most mind-blowing, transformative experience I've ever had in interviews. The way that he is seeing the world truly is a vision into the future that I don't have. And it always, it's so important for people to see it because he brings up, you know, global warming, for instance, and there's people that get triggered by this conversation of global warming, but he talks about how we can change that, not through, you know, carbon credits, by changing our farming patterns. That is actually the fact that we've killed the earth with these, you know, these pesticides and herbicides that are killing the microbes that convert the CO2 back into oxygen. So in both ways, I think he speaks to the liberals that believe in organic farming and, you know, the Republicans that sort of want to sort of see a difference, but not have, you know, carbon credits and feel like we're all being controlled by this system. And so on so many subjects, he really truly is harmonizing. And so you're right. I still consider it one of the most important, or the two of the most important interviews I've ever done. And he is one of the most important people. If I was president, if I was king for a day, Zach Bush is actually who I would put in charge of Health and Human Services. I'm not sure he would take it, but I would say, I want you overseeing how the science and medicine is being dealt with in this country. I think that people like him in much higher positions of power would be truly transformative. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody other than the pharmaceutical industry that would lose a lot of money and maybe the oil and gas industry. But for the citizens of the world, I think that he truly speaks to everyone's heart.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're getting a little short on time. I just wanted to also reference Catherine Austin Fitts, because the interview you did with her recently was amazing. And I'd say she's one of the most credible people on the planet when it comes to talking about the connection between vaccine passports and digital currency and how the people who want the vaccine mandated the most are the central bankers. So this kind of comes full circle, but we can't allow this to happen. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we all have very busy lives and a lot going on. So if there's any closing thoughts here, but I really thank you, Del, for your time. And thank you so much, Greg and Charlie, for being a part of this as well.
Well, you know, my closing thought, since you brought up Catherine Austin Fitts, one of the things that is, you know, interesting is I was working a perfectly great job at CBS. I'd won an Emmy Award. And I was moved, my life was moved, I would say, by God. I know for some people, that may be difficult, but I truly believe faith is how we move forward. I had faith that doing what felt right to me would always benefit me and my family. And so I walked away from my television career. And I have been nothing but blessed along that journey. I think so many of us are being challenged right now. Our jobs may be on the line, and so many people are saying, I don't know. I mean, look, I've got to feed my family. They're not going to let me go to work if I don't get the vaccine. For those people, I would say I've looked at this, and I have a very important question for you. How do you plan on feeding your family if you are dead? The consequences are that high with this vaccine. There is short-term death that is now proved. Even the CDC and FDA are starting to have to admit it. The long-term deaths are around the corner. We're talking rises in cancer like we've never seen, autoimmune disease. And then my big concern with antibody-dependent enhancement, which appears to be happening in Israel and other nations, where we're now starting to see the hospitals fill up with the fully vaccinated who are sick and dying. I believe the vaccine, as it showed in all the animal trials, has the ability to enhance the disease and help the pathogen kill people. And then you have Geert Vanden Bossche, who's worried about destruction of our species as we pressure more and more variants and more deadly variants to become the dominant strains. So all of these things are upon us. But I want to say to people is that there's something so powerful about having faith. There's something so powerful about your intuition in these moments. We all look at, even listening to the Highwire at a certain point, just becomes a part of the cacophony, the news, and we're hearing it from all sides. It's really hard. You know, the thing that I use, and I really believe in meditation, but for those out there, whatever you want to call it, you really need to take moments to sit down and clear all of that noise out of your head and ask yourself, what do I naturally feel is right in this situation? Where do I naturally want to take my children when it comes to healing decisions? I think that intuition is the most powerful tool we have, and that's God speaking through us. I think we all have a mission right now. It's, Del Bigtree, I'm one guy sitting at a table here. I make no difference in the world if people don't hear me, and then at least share the videos that I'm putting out there with their friends. If it's me by myself on a stage, we don't change this. And each one of us has talents that I believe we were chosen. I truly believe that we are chosen to be alive in this moment. I want people to stop complaining and whining and wasting energy on asking this stupid question, God, is this really happening? How many times are you going to pinch yourself? It's happening. We're here. This is that cataclysmic event that our founding fathers warned us about. This has been prophesied, not by them and maybe even biblically. This is that moment. And guess what? We're the ones that are here for it. This isn't going to be left on our children. It's not going to be left on our grandchildren. We won't not know how this ends and have to have some sort of a martyrdom where we, gave our life to but never saw how this happens. This is going to happen in our lifetime. In the next probably 2 to 5 years, we will see whether or not we planted the seeds for a new future or not. I mean, that's just exciting. I mean, life is just a blink for whoever's on this planet. Some it's shorter than others. But can you imagine in this blink of our lifetime, we're going to see this transition either to a military and horrifying Orwellian world, and then we'll die out of it, or a brand new world, an evolved world that under this attack treated it like a birth instead of a death. And that's what we need to do. Yeah. We need to recognize that these are the birth pangs of a future that, was dreamed about in the 1960s when my parents were marching in Chicago, that's been dreamt about by Martin Luther King and those before us. We are at the precipice of change in a brilliant place. So all of you that are out there right now, saying, I'm going to lose my job, all I can say is this. Why would you want that job? Why do you want to work in a hospital where you're being forced to murder people? And we didn't even get into the details of that, but it's true. You're not allowed to give them hydroxychloroquine. You're not allowed to give them ivermectin. In many cases, you're not even giving them monoclonal antibodies and budesonide, things that work. You're using a drug like remdesivir that didn't even make it through the Ebola trials. They thought it was better to just deal with Ebola than use remdesivir. And now in this issue that only has a death rate of about 0.2 to 0.002%, you're going to give a deadly drug. All of that's happening. And I'm to that point, and to end this, I want to say, I think most of us out there have a dream of a job or something that we really wanted to do. We think of maybe when my children grow up, I will retire and I'll get to pursue my dream. I would say that this is a spectacular time. And if I can be any example to people out there, the moment I stepped out in faith, I've been nothing but blessed and seen nothing but success. And many of the people that are in this call right now and that I see around the world that are treating this moment as a moment to bring in their dreams, they're living it. It is real and it's now. You have a dream of what you always want to do with your life. Don't take a vaccine, risk your death to stay in a job that you don't like anyway. Go out and become that change, become that dream, pursue it now. Businesses are going to continue to be destroyed. Everything's being destroyed. So what risk are you taking? Your job may not even exist if you fight for it anyway under the circumstances. So go and let's create the new paradigm. Let's build new medical establishments. I want to build new medical boards and new hospitals that bring in true energy healing, the things that we know are out there. All we are suffering from right now is sort of the dying grasp of the Neanderthals of medicine, the Neanderthals of banking. They're trying to hold on to relevance, and they're going to use martial law to enforce it. But we're smarter than they are. We're more creative than they are. That's why we have grown so incredibly fast. We're at 54% now. I think we'll be at 75% by next year, simply because they're about to make a third vaccine mandatory to call yourself vaccinated. So everyone that got 2 shots will suddenly be considered unvaccinated. I know they think they're winning the game, and they'll be able to say, oh, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated, even though it's really those with 2 doses that are dying. But those people are going to come to us because they're being labeled along with us. And so we are growing with every one of these steps. And these little lizard brains, these evil, dark, sick people that don't believe in God or anything bigger than themselves, they are dying before our eyes. And they're killing people, and people will die with them. The only thing we have to decide now is how long will we be silent and watch those of us around us die, or we're willing to have those uncomfortable conversations and willing to take those steps out on faith to what we dream is true for our lives. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about your neighbor. Think about yourself, your dream, and make it happen now. That's how we build the new world, a beautiful world. And that's what I think is happening.
God bless you, Del Bigtree. Thank you.
Yeah, and let's get the FDA to release the Pfizer documents within 100 days instead of 55. We got important work to do. So we know you got to run, Del. So thank you so much for your time.
God bless you. That was great.
Yeah. All right. Let's get back to work, guys. Bye.